Okay, this is James Parrish, and he is the representative for the museum.
Hello, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm James Parrish. I'm marketing and events for the Museum of History here. I'd like to welcome everybody here, and specifically welcome Jill Stein. Thank you for coming out and choosing to have it here. As far as the museum goes, we do have memberships available, and we're open 6 days a week. Come see us. We tell the great history of St. Petersburg and the great state of Florida. Outside of that, on a personal note, I actually work for a third-party candidate here in Pinellas County, Lucas Overby, for Congress. He's a libertarian. And so as far as third party goes, if you really want a third party, obviously he's not Green Party, but there is a third party for Congress going against Bill Young, if you want to check that out. Otherwise, I look forward to hopefully getting a third party in any office soon, because we need to break this down. Thank you, and enjoy your minute.
Okay, well, that said, we do not have a candidate in the race, Green, so in District 13, if you are in that, then go voting for the third party. And that's what we got to do, is overthrow the government. We've got to start opening elections, opening debates, Green Party for First Amendment rights. And we hear a lot of talk about Second Amendment rights, but we need that, the First Amendment rights, that's first. You know, so I think we got to keep that in mind. And there's been so much problem, like when you talk about your rights and your ideas, you can actually end up in jail. And that's not First Amendment rights. And also whistleblowers, they're using their First Amendment rights, free speech, and also we talk about people like they call them terrorists and hackers, but actually they're getting some information out that needs to be disclosed. So disclosure is a good thing. Secret societies are a bad thing. Secret societies with an intent to do wrong or to control are a bad thing. So that needs to be exposed, and our heroes really should be the whistleblowers. And so that's one of the things that I want to bring up, is the fact that we do need more voices, more choices, and we need to support that. I meet a lot of independents and a lot of NPAs. And they say, well, we just don't want to commit to a party. And what I would like to say is, when you register your values, you send a message, you send a direction. By voting, if you register Green, if you look at the platform and then you see that you agree with almost everything, it's worth starting there. Because what you will do is the politicians, they're really waiting for the wind to blow. And if you start blowing the wind in a direction of like, we're not going to vote for you unless you just, we want Keystone Pipeline ended. We want, strict attention paid to 350.org as the parts per million in our atmosphere. We don't want to just talk about bringing the people in that are overseas in different military bases. We want them back home. We can put them to work doing other things. We could get the Green New Deal going, which is on our national website, gp.org. So we can do those kind of things and make those kind of things happen by participating and registering your values, registering your party as a Green Party. You send that message. It's a vote they cannot take away. So I would urge independents and NPAs to choose a party. I hope you choose Green. I hope you're thinking Green Party, but take a look at our platform. But register your values, because NPA and independent does not send a message. It just shows you don't like what's going on, but you're not saying what you want to go on. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bruce, and he's running for office as a Green, Bruce Wright, and come on up, Bruce, and he's running for sheriff, and he'll tell you why that's a very important place.
So I thought it was kind of humorous that I'm wearing a Bob Marley shirt and running for sheriff, but anyway. I am a member, and Jill will tell you more about this, of the Green Shadow Cabinet. And we are looking at forming a Pinellas County version of the Green Shadow Cabinet. And so one of the first things we're doing is, I guess you could say I'm running as the Green Shadow Sheriff. Sounds like something like the Green Hornet or something. But anyway, and the reason I'm doing that is, a lot of people don't realize, sheriff is one of the most powerful elected officials in the country. They have the power to evict, and foreclose on people's homes. And many of y'all may be aware that our vice presidential candidate, Sherry Honkala, who's with the Poor People's Economic and Human Rights Campaign, and I'm with her in that campaign. I'm one of the people on the executive committee. She ran for sheriff, and her whole platform was based around the notion of zero evictions and a moratorium on foreclosures. And that's going to be part of my platform, as well as decriminalization, because sheriffs have the power to do that. They don't have the power to legalize. That's a legislative thing. But they do have the power to allocate law enforcement for what would be the most important things to deal with. And what I've seen from my own experience, because I've been a visitor at what we call the St. Petersburg Hilton, aka the Pinellas County Jail. And what we see there is a warehousing primarily of people that have committed nonviolent offenses, particularly marijuana offenses, ordinance offenses, like we all know what's going on in St. Petersburg with the homeless and criminalization of the homeless. So those are issues that I would be dealing with, as well as the problems that we have with DCF. The sheriffs are the ones that run child protection, and there's a lot of problems there. There's a lot of corruption in the jail. Recently we dealt with an African-American gentleman that was picked up, quote unquote, in a sweep downtown that the police did of the homeless community, and he was horribly beaten by sheriff's guards in the jail. He has filed a complaint with Internal Affairs, and this is something we're working on. This is not only something the Poor People's Campaign is involved in, but the Greens are. I'm with the St. Petersburg Greens. And for us, this is a critical issue. And so we decided to take the bull by the horns, and I'm going to have the same approach, at least I plan on, that Sherry did when she ran for sheriff. Full disclosure, yes, I've been arrested, yes, I've had bankruptcy, all kinds of things. But I'm a real person, and what we find too often running for office are people that aren't real, or at least they won't be truthful. I watched the comedy, I can't remember the name of it the other day. Will Ferrell was running for office. That's funny in and of itself, the comedian, but it was a regular movie. And in the end, the person that lost nearly beat him because he was finally honest about everything in his life and his past. If we don't have real people running for office, and it's always going to be people that are lawyers or big money. I mean, how many millionaires are in Congress, right? Then things are never going to change. And so that's why we're forming a local version of the Green Shadow Cabinet, and why I do intend to run for sheriff. It's 4 years away, so there's plenty of time to work on this, and we hope that other people are going to join in this and run for office. Thank you.
Now, we'd like to invite a poet up here. His name is So Many Styles. He's a local poet and he's an Iraq War veteran. So Many Styles, will you please?
As stated, I actually began doing I was introduced to spoken word poetry 107 in Iraq a few years back, so that's cool. But I don't really, I used to be into a lot of political stuff, but right now I'm kind of more into just the whole social engineering. So that's what this poem, I don't know how many I'm going to do. I'm going to do this one here. But animated messages, and let's listen on. They get you while you're young, so you think it's all for fun. Learn the words to the songs, you got to sing along. They'll tell you what is right, so you tell you what is wrong. In the world of make-believe, we need them to belong. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is anything but a childhood innocent toy story. This is saving lives from the lights, it's the lives of Lion Kings. Ice cold heart from his modified little mermaids. And color, truth and self-esteem. Murdering fetal dream of the young minds of emptiness of meaningless yearnings that not only mean guaranteed increase to mean average box office earnings, but also inspire remotely controlled commercialized urges. Your children, it's out there depravity. It's innocence with vanity, but young to desperate to escape reality by clinging to materialistic fantasies like sea urchins. Improve is how they beg them, but the person's a product of guns. But curtains on the floor, they've been convinced. Failing to do something other than answer their call means nothing less than perfect. Less than 20,000 feet deeper than the... Yes. I'm telling you. People, money America always have
And how do I duck this realist ones in the ugliness? This is finding one's way after coming full circle. By losing one concern, we have a sponsor square pants is gay. This is over to the entire heart with a table of ignorance. Magnet and manipulative, media man handling. A clash of colors, a global time and time. Over fight and fear, the dark and light and vote, and lock and sound. The lockdown masses, afraid to enlightenment. Entice you, entice the noose around the neck, or reduce misinterpretation. The father goose, the SS, Joseph Goals, Hitler youth step. Before he can play out fake gold-plated egg inside your child's head. This isn't the cow Joseph Ramon with the hand and spoon fed. You're sticking a fork in the yellow brick road. You're just sign language. Follow me down a rabbit hole. It's up your mind and eyes, the invisible ink. The little white lies inscribed inside of the eye of the storm. That's the brain dead, very black top, whitewash, pull it back out to the bottom of the deep, blonde, blue hairy beast. So this is somewhere over the rainbow. I haven't done this in a while. I'm sorry. That's still one of my talents. I'm going to write and memorize stuff. Stuff happens. You'd be messed up to see non-existent pots of gold. Somewhere over the rainbow, until you truly find love is you who's afraid of the big bad wolf. With them while you work, but not together. That's socialism. When you figure out, it counts with smokes. But blow holes in the smoke sweet like a harpoon to whale. Putting up Pinocchio's nose, they're going to tip the scale so I can expose her. Moby Dick of all fish stories. Not quite a Nemo, now his story. Because you always get to tell, because you always get to tell the Pocahontas. Rachel doesn't fall charity, but make sure she knows how to make it. Not to make her mark like Joan of Arc, because make his story herself is making art. You see, it's for her and her looks. We have to read a book, then put your women clean and cook, and surely go be hard. That's something that tells young girls how to carry themselves, what they're supposed to wear, how they're supposed to act. So Sleeping Beauty is Snow White, the Prince of Kiss and Bull from it transforms into a prince. The beauty and the sun's for the beast. So where you stand, by your man, you still 3 paces behind like Mulan, looking cute, flapping her flower, white face and envy to hand. He went through cat from tentacles throwing, cannibal biceps, hero benches, looking like grotesque, Greek god, then a dwarf with a gorgeous goddesses, pixelated pigs with long curly locks, rosy flush cheeks, and then the physiques, clicking splendor besides the breast which heave. Each rated breath for the whole lady waiting was hot in a rest they shared. A happy ending between wedding, the white dress, transformers, robots in the sky, trying to hide their agenda like the subsequent, and find gender pole. That's why from E-Man, the G.I. Joe, the real record hero is reliable on minds. Besides the fact that they're in blood, there's nothing funny about how Bugs Bunny beats up and down with blood. It's how to train your dragon, how to train yourself to recognize the system to infiltrate children's mind, the doctrine, the social codes and conduct rooted in the scientific social construct. Phallic concepts and galactic as women essential objects, animated bars of purity, virtuous fixture, the suspended states of virginity, ready and awaiting conquest, the version of love identity, the winner of the Manly Man contest. This is social engineering's finest. Power stands children, standards spoken mirrors with appearance and everything. This is bigger than biology. A better way to shape the future than to mold a child's psychology. Prove a point you say, it's only a cartoon. Thank you.
Without further ado, I would like to announce or welcome Jill Stein to the podium. And she was the 2012 Green Party presidential candidate. So I'm just hooking up the power because we've got the power. And big thank you to the St. Petersburg Greens above all for making this happen.
because, and thank you for that wonderful spoken word, which was just like, wow, amazing. I would love to hear that again about 10 times.
I've got a CD, but unfortunately I don't have any on me right now. But
Okay, next time. Yeah, bring it out. That's really dynamite. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And, it's great to be here in the Museum of History because this is an incredibly historic moment where there's a lot of stuff going on and there is an incredible uprising for democracy and justice, which is really happening all over the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and about the power that we really do have to take back the promise of democracy and what our lives ought to be like and everything else. So I'm going to talk about how we are rising up green, rising up just, rising up for democracy. And a Green New Deal is sort of a focus for how we can fix this. This is a win-win. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is kind of a good news package, and I want to put it out there for people to use. Somebody asked me a question the other day about, so what do you do when people are just so hopeless and feel so overwhelmed? How do you deal with them? And my response is to say, well, it's kind of like we all have to be political therapists. And when people don't rise up, it's because they either don't know how serious the problem is, or they don't know how right at hand the solutions are. It's not like we can't afford it, we can't afford not to do it. So all rolled into one here, this is kind of a package of how serious the threats are, but how absolutely in our hands right now the fix is. And what it really comes down to is just flicking the switch in our own brains from powerlessness, which is what the powers that be want us to think, that we are powerless, to actually realizing that in fact we are powerful. We have solutions and we have the numbers. In the court of public opinion, we've actually already won. So this is sort of that news rolled into one. So, starting off, this is about that democracy movement that's rising up. That's Tahrir Square, the Occupy Wall Street, all over the country, really all over the world. The tar sands blockade, the teachers' strikes. This was in Chicago, but they're going on all over as our public schools are being shut down. The Walmart workers' walkouts and other workers who are standing up for workers' rights and for decent wages in the fast food industry as well, and for the right to unionize. The student debt movement, which is really the powerhouse all over the world. Students standing up for jobs and for affordable education and to get out of debt is another huge driver. The movement to stop evictions and to blockade evictions is happening all over. And the demonstrations to stop nuclear power and fracking and GMOs. And let me just ask, people who are here tonight, how many are here because you heard about this through the Green Party and you're part of the Green Party? Some and not everyone, okay. And others are here, I'm just curious what networks you heard about this through. Facebook, okay, cool. And was that through, through the GMO network or? Okay, all right, great. Well, that's really good because I think this is about the Green Party, but it's also much bigger than the Green Party. And I think that politics is one tool here, but it's also about social movement, which is much bigger. And how we bring the power of all this uprising together. So, when you step back and you look at what's going on, we've got a set of these converging crises, and you say, oh my God, where do I start first? From the Wall Street bailouts to the unemployment and declining wages, the corporate free trade agreements with this new Trans-Pacific Partnership. Have people heard about that? All right, so some have heard, some not heard about it yet, because it's not out there in the media much. All right, so most people know about it, great. The attacks on Medicare and Social Security, foreclosures and debt, the expanding war. You know, Obama gave this speech the other night about how he was going to rein in, you know, this war, but really what he was doing was just sort of redefining it in a very slippery way. If you actually looked carefully at what he said, you know, he said things like that the drone attacks would no longer be limited to high-level operational leadership in Al-Qaeda and associated forces. He took those words out, which really describes what's happening there, because it's only 2% of some 4,000 people plus who've been killed by these drones, only 2% that are high-level operatives. Who else is being killed here? You know, it just speaks volumes about this war on terror. And, you know, he didn't say anything about our needing to have Congress restored to its power to declare war. War should not be established by fiat from a declaration in 2001 that said that the president, and it didn't say this, you know, but the president is using that to say he can declare war anytime, anywhere, every place, and can kill anyone, including U.S. citizens. That is the power of a dictator, not the power of a president. So, you know, that is one area where Greens and Libertarians come absolutely together. We're both really united in fighting the power of tyranny. And I'll come back to this in a minute, and the things that Jennifer was saying before about this war on our basic liberties, our basic freedoms, on civil liberties, and this expanded power of the presidency, which basically defies all the checks and balances that were established by our, you know, by our founding mothers and fathers. The fathers explicitly, but with the guidance of the mothers, I must say. You know, they established all of these safeguards, these checks and balances, these limits on power. And we see a presidency that has just gone wild. Both in terms of its expanded war, but also in terms of its attacks on our civil liberties. And whether it's the First Amendment and our right to a free press, our right to protest, our right for redress of grievances, it's all under attack, as well as our rights to privacy and our right to freedom from unwarranted searches. But this is, any one of these things would be very disturbing. The fact that they are all happening together is really a wake-up call that we need to stand up. And these violations of democracy and our civil liberties are just part of this larger constellation of what's going wrong. And you can add to that the assault on immigrant rights, and even this new sort of immigration reform bill, if you actually look at it, it is a real slap in the face to basic human rights and the principles, really, of respect for human rights and international law. So that's a state of emergency. Food security. How many were at the GMO thing today? Okay, awesome. That was so exciting. I want to give a big shout out for that. That was, as I understand, one of the biggest demonstrations that happened in Tampa in years. And that was organized in just a couple of weeks. And that was just one out of about 200 rallies or so that were taking place all over the country. So that, again, is a real sign, you know, of the wake-up call and the uprising for democracy and justice that's going on. And we'll come to that in just a second. The climate movement, too, you know, and the threats to the climate. So you put them all together, and it's like, you know, it's like, oh my God, which way to turn? And where do I start? Anybody ever have that feeling? Like, there's so much going on, you don't know where to begin. And I will say, as someone who didn't get political until I turned 50, I was working my way through the list of issues that we got to worry about. And as a healthcare provider, I was first working on health and our right to a healthcare system, and thinking if anything was going to sort of get people up in arms, that would speak to everybody. But in Massachusetts, we actually held a referendum. We were outspent 30-1. Only beat back by 2 points. This was a referendum for a single-payer system like Medicare for All. Outspent 30-1, we were beat back by 2 points. But, this is what they do. They pile on where they see, the pushback coming. So I sort of worked my way from healthcare then to environmental organizing. And we got, pushed back. At first we were shutting down incinerators and coal plants, and instead starting programs and helping to support programs for clean renewable energy, create jobs that, I was here, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry. How's that? Okay, terrific. Instead, creating jobs in clean renewable energy, healthy food systems, recycling. We don't need the incinerators, and we don't need the landfills either. We could be recycling and redesigning actually our products for life cycle design. Every one of these problems can be solved in a way that creates lots of jobs, and jobs that don't make us sick or commit us to a permanent state of war, but actually make us healthy and make the economy healthy. So a bunch of us got together and said, hey, let's pass campaign finance reform, because it's the power of these predators to buy off our elected officials that stops us dead in our tracks all the time. Every time we're about to actually fix one of these problems, we get thwarted by the power of money and politics. We passed campaign finance reform in my home state. We passed public financing for campaigns by a 2-1 margin in a public referendum. And then what happened was the Democratic legislature, 95% Democratic in Massachusetts at the time, turned around and they repealed it on a voice vote. Wow. And that said to me, this isn't something we can fix within the system. We have to change the whole system, throw the bums out, start over with clean politics. So at the young, tender age of 50, I got political. And for the first time, I became a member of a political party, realizing that their goal is to keep us divided and conquered. There's nothing they want more than to have us divided into all these different silos, each working separately, each of us never getting to critical mass on what we need to fix. That's exactly the way they want it, or for us to feel too defeated and overpowered to do anything about it. So, at one day the light bulb went off for me, and I realized that if we were going to win on any one of these issues, we needed to start building broad coalitions across the spectrum of people, peace, and the planet, and democracy. It all comes together. And then the other light bulb went off saying, oh, that's what a political party is. When you start building coalitions, it takes work. And it really takes a certain dedicated structure to do that. So I finally realized that's what a political party should be. It should not be what it is in this country, with the two corporate parties basically sold to the highest bidder and to the fossil fuels and the predatory lenders and the big banks. That's what political parties are about in this country. So at any rate, at that point, I got recruited to run for office, and have never stopped running for office for the last 12 years. It is a way to organize. It is not the be-all, end-all by any means. The real driver here in change is social movement. But a political voice is one very important tool for fighting that fight. And as you saw, as Bruce was saying earlier, and big shout out to Bruce for running for sheriff. at the local level. I think that is so cool, the green shadow government at the local level. It's awesome. And we're now doing this at the national level. We realized when the campaign was over that people didn't want to stop. Just because they won a rigged election doesn't mean that we're supposed to stop fighting, sit down and surrender, and roll over. So I'm going to just figure out how to shut this off. Okay. I think that did it. All right, good. And that feedback. So we decided, or I should say we realized, that we could keep this going in all kinds of ways by continuing this sort of road trip to reach out and help empower and activate people at the grassroots level. And that we could continue this by having a cabinet and actually fighting. Yeah, do you know what that feedback is? I don't think it's that one, but maybe I'm talking too close. Yeah. Maybe I don't need the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so it's not the mic. Okay, great. You weren't hearing an echo in your brain then. Okay. So anyway, we realized that we could create a cabinet that would be watchdogging. And in fact, shadow cabinets are it's like an institution that's used in many democracies around the world. They create a shadow cabinet after an election in order to continue the opposition voice. In this country, there is no opposition party. Democrats and Republicans basically agree on 90% of their agenda, except, on the sort of the margins of social policy. And they make a very big deal out of that. But, the differences on women's reproductive rights, which is important, on voting rights, which is important. But that's not going to save your job. It's not going to save the climate. It's not going to stop the ripoff from the banks. It's not going to stop this predatory Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's not going to stop the foreclosures, which continue to throw millions of families out of their homes. We need a green sheriff to do that. So, we realized we could keep this going. And it's great because their fear machine really revs up during an election. It's constantly scaring people and trying to convince you that you've got to vote for the lesser evil when the differences between them are really window dressing. But they're very focused on fear campaigning during an election. After an election, the fear machine kind of, it's not happening. So you actually get to have a real conversation about what our lives look like and about the power that we actually have to stand up and fight back and take back our future. So it's been incredibly exciting. Go to greenshadowcabinet.us when you're really outraged at what is coming down from Democrats and Republicans, like this expanding war and the free trade agreements and the endless foreclosures. The jobs recovery, which is not a recovery. These are low-wage and insecure jobs. We have more people than ever on food stamps, even while the economy is supposed to have been recovering. There are almost 50 million Americans now who need food assistance in order to get through the day. So that recovery ain't happening. The Department of Labor actually predicts that 9 out of 10 jobs being created over the next 10 years are low-wage, insecure jobs that do not require a college degree. They don't pay college wages. So this is the kind of economy that they have engineered us into, and that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as another one of these free trade agreements, is just going to keep pushing us towards. So corporate America and the two parties that represent it are very happy with the economy. Corporate profits have never been better. Wall Street and the stock market has never been higher. They like this just fine. So they have stayed the course. It's up to us to change the course and take our future back. So I'm going to focus in here a little bit on two of these crises because they're kind of central, and share with you how they are unbelievably fixable in a way that is just a win-win across the board. So we're going to focus in on the unemployment crisis and wages, and also on the climate crisis. And we'll talk a little bit about food security and the democracy crisis too. So this is just some of the little factoids I mentioned before. I mentioned some of these, about the economic crisis. Actually, I guess I didn't mention these. One out of every 2 people, according to the most recent census, the U.S. Census Bureau, 1 out of every 2 Americans are in poverty or low income and heading for poverty. That is not okay. 36 million students are in debt. That's students or recent graduates. Half of all college graduates are working in jobs that do not pay college wages, which means you can't repay those loans. So these are indentured servants. This is where the real power for change comes from. It's what the driver was in Tahrir Square and in all the democracy revolutions in the Middle East. It's an ongoing battle, but it is well underway, and it's being driven largely by young people who recognize they don't have a future in the system as it exists. The jobs I mentioned before, 1 out of every 3 African-American young men is either in jail, on probation, or on parole. This is absolutely unacceptable. We need to stop that school-to-prison pipeline and actually create jobs in our community, which is going to fix this. And here's a little picture to just take home with you because it makes so crystal clear. I thought I was, fairly well informed, but it wasn't until a few years ago that I actually understood what the American economy looks like. Imagine you have 100 people in a room, and that represents the American population. And you have 100 loaves of bread, and that represents all our wealth and resources. The richest person in the room gets 50 loaves of bread, and the 50 poorest people in the room are sharing 1 loaf of bread. We hear a lot about how obscenely rich the 1% is, but we don't hear very much about how obscenely, immorally poor we have made half of the American population, sharing 1 loaf of bread. So this is a revolution waiting to happen. And what are they doing about it? More free trade agreements, these tiered wage programs. This is what Obama was so busy celebrating, and this is why they went, to the mat to prevent Sherry Honkala and myself from participating in the debates, because they didn't want word getting out that these jobs are not a recovery. These are jobs being created, coming in at half the wages of what these manufacturing jobs used to pay before. So they do not have any semblance of a recovery going on. This is why we're creating jobs, but we have more people on food assistance than ever. They are cutting Medicare and Social Security. They are continuing the Wall Street bailouts. Another little known fact. How many people were aware of that? That we continue to bail out Wall Street. A few, but it's not many. They don't talk about it. $85 billion a month. Wall Street banks are continuing to be bailed out.
Wow.
If we, instead of buying up bad debt at the banks, instead we were buying up the debt of student loans, we would have the student loan debt, it would be over. It would have been over in a year. They've been doing this now. They're well into their 2nd year. So student debt would be gone. That's what democracy looks like. All this nonsense about fiscal cliff sequestration, the White House budget, it's, this is like all the wrong stuff. And they're not fixing it. And then quickly, I'm going to come to how we're going to fix that in a moment. And it's not rocket science. I want to share some of the little key factoids about the climate crisis because it's important. In our conversations with each other, we need to be political therapists. And part of being political therapists is helping people get a grip on what's actually happening because this information gets suppressed all over the place. But we don't have very long to fix this, and it will really get you up and out of your seat to recognize how really imminent these threats are. So, these are numbers actually from a recent report to the United Nations. Already it's almost 500,000 people a year who are being killed through climate, largely through flooding and drought. And these are largely poor people around the world. But it is coming home to roost here in the U.S. as well. Not so many deaths, but huge economic impacts. And part of that was the storms and the extreme weather events of recent years. In 2011, we broke all records in terms of severe weather events. We had 14 storms and other events, droughts, that cost us as taxpayers at least $1 billion. So that was $14 billion events, and the next year we had almost as many. So we're off the charts. Just a few weeks ago, we heard about the fires outside of LA, the forest fires. Absolutely record-setting fires. There were at least 1,000, it may have been more, homes that had to be evacuated. These came really close to highly populated areas around Los Angeles. And what was so scary about this was that this is the kind of firestorm you would normally see after a very long, hot, dry summer. Now we are seeing this kind of a storm early in the spring. So that is a heads up. The drought, we now have permanent drought. There's a term for it called mega drought. I don't know, are you familiar with that? It's a term scientists are using to describe what's going on now in the South and in the Southwest. So this is impacting our food supply as well as our water supplies, raising the price of food for everybody throughout the U.S. And another thing that comes with this, aside from the floods and the storms, are heat waves. And we haven't heard too much about this, but a few years ago, you may remember in Europe, this was I think 2003, there was a period of a week where they had sustained temperatures of 105. And does this ring bells for people? France and Italy and maybe Spain too. And there's about 40 or 50,000 people who died with sustained heat of 105. Now the deal is, all of these changes that we just talked about have happened with less than 1 degree centigrade warming. It's about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit if you use our system. All these changes happen with less than 1 degree centigrade. But right now the science is predicting we're going to be at 2, 3, or 4 degrees by 2050. Anybody plan to be here in 2050? Most alive on the planet. On the planet? Anybody? Quite a few of us, I think. So the term 2050 starts to really mean something. They used to say, don't worry, these kinds of, serious climate changes are centuries away. Now it's happening in our lifetimes and today. 80% of all the warming has happened in the last 25 years. 80% of the changes that have been spread out over a decade and a half, a century and a half, have happened in just the last couple decades. So it is accelerating, and that means we gotta, we really need to take the bull by the horns and fix this now. And the other point here was that 105 degrees is what we would see in our old climate. But in a world that warms 2 or 3 or 4 degrees, your heat wave is not going to be 105 degrees. The heat wave is going to be more like 117 and 120 degrees. Wow. So, you know what happens then? Your air conditioner and your electricity and all that goes. And when it goes, and it's humid, there's really nothing you can do because the water is hot at that point. I guess here you have the ocean and you could cool down, so it would be everybody in the ocean. But, what's that? You'll be underwater. Exactly, right. And that is a very important point. Next slide, in fact, we just talked about that. The other piece is that once you get to 4 degrees warming, which some very reputable agencies are now predicting by 2050. Once you get to 4 degrees warming, your agricultural productivity goes down about by half. So all go there. Here's the other thing that happens. So this is what the Arctic looked like in 1979. This was 2007, so you can see a lot of white hair, and it's half gone in 2007, and now people are predicting maybe in the next decade. Used to say by 2030, all right, but people are now saying quite likely within the next 10 years, it'll be gone, and that in turn accelerates everything else. Because once you have this patch of blue, if it's white, it reflects heat. But if it's blue, it absorbs heat. So we're in the process of losing this reflector right now, which is just going to accelerate the warming. So all of this is why we need a Green New Deal right now. I'll come to that in a second. And this is one other thing about the ice. What is the elevation here? 0, 7, 10. All right, well, Greenland alone contains 20 feet of sea level. And Greenland has accelerated, the melting of Greenland has accelerated 5-fold, that is by 500%, in the last decade. People used to say, oh, don't worry, it's not going to break up for at least 1,000 years. Now people are saying, well, we don't know. We don't have a clue how these things go. And Jim Hansen, the foremost climatologist, is saying it could happen over a couple of years, not meaning in a few years, but we could get to that tipping point where it just breaks up, where your ice cube just dissolves. And it's not like a slow melt anymore. It's like a huge flood, 20 feet over a couple of years. So it doesn't give you a lot of time to acclimate. This is why, we absolutely cannot wait to call this an emergency. And it just goes on from Greenland. Greenland is 24 feet. The South Pole, down at the bottom there, that has more ice than anything. At the top, the North Pole, that ice is already in the water. So when it melts, it really doesn't raise the water level at all. So that's not a worry with the current Arctic. But for Greenland and for the Antarctic down below, that ice is all sitting on rock. So when it melts, it's water going into the bathtub, and that bathtub is going to come out. West Antarctic is 19 feet, and the East Antarctic is 170 feet. So this is not what a livable future looks like. This is Boston, just to give you an example, and that's with 20 feet. We just lose a whole lot of our densely populated urban areas, and this is at 40 feet and so on. So this is kind of what's going on here. This is 400,000 years ago, and this is coming up in time to now. And these are kind of the ice ages here. This represents how much carbon dioxide is in the air. Typically, it has cycled over a period of 100,000 years or so. Is usually what these changes have taken place on, very slowly. So when it goes up here, that is the melting of the ice age. When it went down here, that was the ice age, just because ice and carbon dioxide correlated. But this is what happened starting about 100 years ago. Boom. And you can see this is like nothing that has come before. This is an absolute abomination of nature. All of a sudden, the carbon level, the CO2 level has gone just absolutely hog wild. So, what are they doing about it? Well, Obama says, yeah, exactly. He's doing all the wrong things. Fracking, drilling, you name it. The Arctic, pipelines, Keystone, free trade, and I might add GMOs and industrial agriculture are a big part of this too, because they cause deforestation in order to, plant some more GMOs, including the ethanol, and that is a big contributor to climate change. And Obama, of course, is leading us in the wrong direction, bragging about how he's increased oil production to the highest level in 16 years, built enough pipeline to circle the globe. He loves pipelines. This is what tar sands looks like. This is the forest before. This is the area that's been basically, devastated by the mining of tar sands. That's in Canada. And you probably know that tar sands is more, it puts out more CO2. They have to put all kinds of toxic chemicals into it in order to retrieve it and then to pump it through the pipelines. And they have to keep it hot. All those things are tailor-made for pipeline ruptures. If you are pumping the oil at high pressure and it's heated and it's full of corrosive chemicals, what are you going to get? You're going to rupture your pipeline. And that's what their track record is. Lots of ruptures. And, we saw this a couple weeks ago in Alabama, I think it was. And, this is what we can expect. Where was it?
Arkansas.
Arkansas, thank you. And this is why our water supplies are very much at risk from this stuff. So the tar sands has to be stopped. And when tens of thousands of us, probably 50,000, went to the White House to tell the president to stand up to big oil, the president was golfing with big oil in the form of this guy, Jim Crane, who is a big investor in fossil fuels, and that's his golfing resort down here in Florida somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where, but this is where the 1% goes. And Obama got out of town. He just hightailed it out of town when 50 people came in to say you gotta stand up to the pipeline. He went to play golf with the pipeline. So some of us weren't too surprised. Was anybody there? Was anybody in DC? I know it's a long way to go from here, but it was wonderful. And this is what fracking pads look like. I guess that's one thing you don't have to worry about in Florida. You do?
Yes.
Is it going on now?
They want it to.
They're trying. Okay. All right, great. Well, then I will say a few words about fracking. Yeah. This is just more absolute suicide, devastates our water supplies, our roads, uses up huge amounts of water at a time when we have water shortages to start with. And it's very toxic to the nearby communities. The gases, the toxic stuff that's used to dissolve the rock is, it comes back out. What goes in goes out, and it goes into the air supply, and these wells are put, when they come in, they go all over the community. They're put in playgrounds, in people's backyards. They're virtually everywhere, and they totally industrialize the landscape. So, finally, why we have to stop GMOs. As you probably know, this is crazy on many levels. It consolidates seeds into the hands of a few big multinational companies. And that is another abomination of nature. Nature, for the past 6 billion years that we've had life on the planet, one rule that nature always obeys is that you have to have lots of seeds whenever life forms of any sort, create the next generation. They need lots of seeds and they need diversity. Putting this all in the hands of 3 companies who own more than half the seed supply right now, and creating a uniform line of seeds is absolutely suicidal in the big scheme of how life works. You need it to be decentralized, you need it to be diverse, you need to have lots of different options, because in the history of life, conditions change in unpredictable ways, and your best insurance policy against that is to have lots of seeds. When trees, lots of seeds at think of a dandelion, or the pollen in a flower, or a tree, an oak tree. When they put out their seeds, they scatter them to the wind, and every different community has changes that are unique and different to them. It's absolutely suicidal to trash that diversity that has been built up by nature over the course of billions of years, actually. So we got to keep that. And, putting it in the hands of a few companies is a disaster for our food economy. The price of seeds has tripled in the hands of Monsanto. Tripled. And and the requirement for pesticides goes up. This is extremely expensive. Why does it go up? Because they create pesticide-resistant weeds. This is just a self-perpetuating cycle. The more pesticides, the GMOs are pesticide tolerant, and their selling point is, oh, we can just throw a lot of pesticides on and get rid of the weeds, and, piece of cake. It makes it really easy, but it doesn't work that way. It's actually created pesticide-resistant weeds, which then require more pesticides, which create more resistant weeds. So it's a never-ending cycle, and it's great if you are a supplier of pesticides, which, guess what? Monsanto is. This is all a marketing scheme for Roundup, which so we need to disrupt that marketing scheme. And, it puts farmers out of business. It has caused over 200,000 farmers in India to commit suicide because they go into debt and they have no way out of it. So these guys are corporate criminals. They're climate criminals and they are food criminals. And they ought to be in jail, not walking the streets. If we can hold tobacco companies accountable and fine them millions and millions of dollars for the health damage they have done, we can certainly hold GMO companies accountable for the pesticide, environmental, food security, and health damage that they are doing. And then finally, it corrupts our democracy. These guys have spent $250 million on campaign contributions and lobbying in the last decade. $250 million in order to buy the policies that permit them to make a killing. And literally, they are making a killing. They spent another $250 million in the last 2 years alone on advertising to convince people that GMOs are harmless. But you know what? It hasn't worked. Because 91% of people want to put a label on all GMO food so we can stop eating it and put it on business. And then just finally, about the democracy attack. This is an attack on our basic freedoms. This just sort of lists that whole litany, which I won't take time to go through except to mention. This is about the attacks on whistleblowers. Attacking whistleblowers is an attack on the freedom of the press. That's right. We have a right to know what's going on in our government, especially when our government is violating international law and human rights. And Bradley Manning, bless his heart and his soul, for waking up not only America, but Iraq. That's why the troops came home. Not because of Barack Obama. It was because Bradley Manning alerted the people of Iraq to what was really going on. That video that went viral about, what was it called?
Collateral murder.
What was it?
Collateral murder video.
Collateral murder, that's right. Thank you. That was the video that Manning outed that showed how people were being targeted mercilessly by remote pilots through drones, actually, who were killing these people. And it really roused public opinion in Iraq so that the U.S. Contract to be able to put soldiers in Iraq and hold them harmless, they refused to renew it. They refused to renew it. And that's why Obama had to bring the troops home. So that was thanks to Bradley Manning and Julian Assange for making it public. So that's why whistleblowers are critical to freedom of the press, and that is our First Amendment right. The right to protest, we have a lot to protest about, and it's not going to get better by itself. So we're going to need to keep protesting, and that means we need to vigorously defend our First Amendment rights, our right to protest. And we shouldn't be thrown in jail or subject to these vindictive and punitive fines and bail for asserting our right to protest. We do have that right, and we're going to need it more and more going forward. Our basic freedoms, the presumption of innocence, that has been long-standing, the so-called habeas corpus, that you have to be accused of a crime and proven guilty in order to be kept in jail. You should not be punished or assassinated, without being accused of a crime and found guilty of it. So, these are some of the basic freedoms that the NDAA and also the AUMF, the authorization
Military force.
for the use of military force. Thank you, in 2001. And that's what Obama is, basing his right to assassinate you on. And he has that right to kill anybody, anywhere, anytime, if you are considered an imminent threat. What does imminent mean? According to international law, imminent means it's like happening right now. There is no time to think about it. There is no time to plan. It is happening right now. That's what imminent means. In Barack Obama's mind, imminent means you don't agree with us. Imminent means you're saying the wrong thing, like the U.S. citizen cleric who was assassinated. When he, if there were issues there, he should have been and could readily have been tried. He could have been tried. He should not have been assassinated. And the same is true, actually, for Osama bin Laden. He was unarmed. His facility was unarmed. He could, and according to international law, he should have been captured and tried. As was done, for example, in the Nuremberg trials, where many more people died than 1 or 2 or 3,000. The Nuremberg trials tried people where millions of people were murdered. And they were, they had the benefit of a trial under international laws. We still have those laws. Either we are a nation of laws and a world of laws, or we are not. And under Obama, we are increasingly becoming a lawless and unjust planet. And this too, we can stop. So let me just quickly run through how we are going to fix it with a Green New Deal. So basically a Green New Deal, have people heard about this? Do you know about it? A few. Okay. So a Green New Deal is like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. 3 months after the New Deal was started in the Great Depression, 4 million jobs had been created. Here we are 5 years, and they only had like 12 million unemployed at the time because it was a smaller population. So within 3 months, they created millions of jobs. We can create millions of jobs right now too. And that's what the Green New Deal does. And basically, it creates 25 million jobs. It jumpstarts the green economy because those are green jobs. And at the same time, it puts a halt to climate change. And equally important, it makes wars for oil obsolete. So it's a win-win. As part of the Green New Deal, and Roosevelt had this too, FDR also called for an economic Bill of Rights. That means a right to a job for everybody who is ready and willing to work. You have a job at a living wage, in fact. That we will end student debt, that free public higher education is a human right. We need to bail out the students and make public higher education free. And we need housing as a human right. We need to end those foreclosures. And build, start building some affordable housing, bring back public housing. There are many ways we can solve the housing problem. We need to break up the banks and establish public banks. Separate the commercial from the investment. That was one of the pieces of the New Deal. And start taxing Wall Street.
Yeah.
Why should Wall Street be the only sector of the economy that doesn't pay a sales tax? Most Americans pay a 6, 7, 8, 9 sales tax, Wall Street, the richest sector of the economy, gets off without paying any. So, we used to have one actually up until the 1960s, and Kennedy phased it out because the economy was in such good shape while we were taxing Wall Street. So let's bring that Wall Street tax back and get the economy in good shape and stop the Wall Street speculators from gambling and losing and making us bail them out. We can fix that all. And while we're at it, we need to take back the Fed as well from the private banks and get control over our monetary policy so that it's working for everyday people, not for the banks. A bunch of democracy reforms, I'll just name a couple really quickly. Get money out of politics. We can do that. And then people say, well, oh my God, then we'll have to pay for it. Well, the deal is if you make the public airwaves free, like they should be, because they're our airwaves, then it doesn't cost nothing. The big cost in political campaigns is the cost of TV advertising time. So you make the public airwaves free, and guess what? The bottom drops out of the cost of political campaigns. So we can do that. We can have fair ballot access so that it's not just the two corrupt corporate political parties that dominate the discussion. We need to get alternatives on the ballot. And as our host tonight here at the museum was saying, this is something that libertarians and Greens are fighting together to try to open up our ballot access and give people real choices. That's what democracy looks like. And when people say, oh, I'm afraid to vote for a third party because I might help the campaign, the guy I don't want to help. That whole thing, it goes away in a minute. First of all, it's a false fear, and I'll come back to that. But it goes away in a minute when you have a ranked choice voting system.
Yes.
That's what we call it. Instant runoff voting, etc., whatever you want to call it. It just means when you go in and you're voting for mayor or governor, for offices that just have one winner, you rank your choices. So if you want to vote for an underdog, that's your number one. And if you want your safety choice as number two, you rank it number two. And the way that the ranked choice voting works is that if your first choice loses, your vote is automatically reassigned to your second choice. Wow. Why are they keeping this a secret? They're keeping it a secret because they don't want you to know that we can actually solve this problem. The first time I ran for office in Massachusetts, we worked with some members of the legislature to actually propose a bill that would create ranked choice voting so that nobody could blame me and the Greens during our run for governor in 2002 if the Republicans got elected. They could have fixed it. We filed the bill in plenty of time that they could have had an insurance policy ready. Why did they not want it? Because they knew if they gave people permission to actually vote their values, they would be out of a job and we would be in our house of government. So don't let them intimidate you with that fear-mongering. That's what it is. It is a fear campaign that's been engineered to keep you from standing up and using your power. We do have the power, but you know what? We got to be able to stand up for it and not back down when they say, oh, but you're going to make terrible things happen. The reality is the politics of fear has made all those terrible things happen. All the reasons that we were told why we have to be good little boys and girls and just follow the marching orders, and vote for the lesser evil, because we didn't want an expanding war, we didn't want more free trade agreements, sending our jobs overseas, undermining our wages here at home. We didn't want these terrible climate policies that were going to melt down the climate. What have we gotten, in the droves? All of those things that we were afraid of. The real engine here of social change and of progressive movement forward, the real engine is our power. our power as we the people, we got to be able to stand up and use it and not blink. You know, when we're on the firing line, we got to stand up and say, that's why we're here. And recognize that the difference between the lesser and the greater evil is really window dressing. It's window dressing. It's not, there may be some differences. This isn't to say there are none. But those differences are not big enough to save your life, to save your job, to save the climate, to save our food system, to save our colleges and our local schools and our housing. They absolutely agree on the devastation that's being heaped on all those areas. So it's up to us to stand up and show the way forward. Just quickly to point out that the Green New Deal is absolutely affordable. The cost studies suggest it would be around $500 billion to create 24 million jobs. And $500 billion is less than the cost of the first stimulus package under Obama in 2009, which was said to create maybe 2 million jobs, maybe 3. Most of them came and went for much more than what this would cost, because they were mainly giving tax breaks rather than creating jobs. Tax breaks do not create jobs. It's a very inefficient way to create jobs. This would create them directly and would actually jumpstart the economy, start the revenue coming back in through the tax base. So this is a real fix. How do we pay for it? $500 billion we could pay for simply by downsizing the military, because that's costing us $1 trillion a year. Not even that. And we have plenty of money to create the Green New Deal. Tax Wall Street, you have, probably as much coming in. So we got money to do all the other things we need to do. And enact Medicare for all, that too will save us trillions of dollars over time. That is a money saver, not a money cost. So cost is no object here. Cost is on the side of moving to a Green New Deal. Let me just skip through some of this other stuff to make the point that young people really are the driver here. We talk about economic justice and racial justice. There's another kind of justice. Climate justice we hear about, and food justice. There's generational justice, because all of those injustices are being heaped on young people right now, who are taking it really on the chin for the cost of education, for the debt, for the lack of jobs, for the climate and food crisis that's really coming down heavy on their shoulders. So that is, I think, why we are seeing young people really standing up now and taking the lead in a way which is so incredibly exciting. Last comment here about the politics of fear. We need to replace that with a politics of courage. And in fact, it's the politics of courage that has always created social change. That means courage in the street, but it also means courage in the voting booth. Don't let them talk you out of the power of your vote, because it's a social movement combined with a political movement that really creates an unstoppable force for change. It's not having a lesser evil in power who will try to take little baby steps forward here and there, maybe while they're taking gigantic leaps backwards towards climate change and Wall Street bailouts and all the rest. It's really about standing up and insisting on the broad, really principled changes that we need now. So when did we see this happen? We saw this happen during the abolition of slavery, when you had a social movement on the ground to abolish slavery, which was absolutely incredible, and you also had political parties, in particular the Liberty Party, which was, a real driving force to raise this issue that we actually needed to have our elected officials, government, step up on the right side here. And the Liberty Party drove that agenda into the Republican Party, which was a grassroots third party at the time. And at times of great social upheaval, sometimes third parties get catapulted up. So just be on the lookout for that. And don't be shy about standing up for what's right, like the Liberty Party did, like the Women's Party did. And here you see actually an agenda for the Women's Party about, why women were entitled to equal economic rights, rights over their family, rights to vote, which was at the core of the women's suffrage movement, with, hunger strikes, pickets, demonstrations. A lot of people went to jail, and here's a sign that said, freedom for women to vote against the party that this donkey represents. So, there have been spoiler parties all along who dared to stand up, and because they dared, they actually moved us forward. And finally, we especially saw this during the labor movement, in the 1900s, 10s, 20s, and 30s, when you had an incredibly courageous movement in the street fighting for a 40-hour work week, for the right to unionize, for the right to benefits, for Social Security, for retirement benefits, for safe workplaces. Still an ongoing struggle. It's improved somewhat in this country, not around the world, as corporations move to where they can, get the biggest blast for their buck. And we saw that recent tragedy in Bangladesh. This fight goes on. And fighting for the rights of working people to unionize is a big part of this. So they were out fighting in the street, and they did not limit it to street fights. They had political battles as well, with the Socialist Party and the Communist Party and the Labor parties and the Progressive Party and the Farm Labor parties. They were fighting in the voting booth as well as in the street. And as this guy, Frederick Douglass, said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. That's why we need to bring the demand into the voting booth. If you don't bring it into the voting booth, it's not happening. And there are many ways to win an election. You don't necessarily have to win the office in order to win the day. You drive the agenda forward by simply standing up and actually casting a vote. Whether you win the election or not, you change the agenda if you dare to vote for it. If you don't vote for it, it's not an agenda. And I'll finish here just with the words of Alice Walker, which is an inspiration to me every day. When I realized this, it was just so uplifting and empowering. The biggest way people give up power is by not recognizing that we have it to start with. Poll after poll shows that our agenda for jobs, for bringing the troops home, cutting the military, reining in GMOs and labeling them so we can put them out of business, bailing out the students, making public higher education absolutely affordable, and ending student debt. These are all things that the public demands and wants. It's just for lack of knowing about us and lack of coordination that allows us to be held back. So, in my view, at the end of the day, this is all about us getting together. A political party is how we get together. Because in a political party, you've got other people to cover all the bases. You don't have to do it yourself. You work on one piece of the agenda, and there are other people to work on other pieces, and we come together in a concerted process and decide what the strategy will be for the year. The struggle is a moving target. We need to constantly be revising the strategy in order to make the most out of the opportunities that are coming our way. And as Chris Hedges mentions, often when transformational change happens, it always catches you by surprise. You feel like you are absolutely up against the wall, and then it will never come down, and then all of a sudden it comes down, as it did in East Berlin, in Germany. Suddenly, on the same day, as Hedges describes it, that the democracy forces were saying, oh, maybe in 10 years. That night, it came down. So the more organized we are, the more ready we are for political transformation that will drive the social transformation. Don't stop what you're doing for a minute. This is about how we all get together to democracy and to change this breaking point that we are at. A breaking point for democracy, for our health, for education, for jobs, for the climate, for peace and international law and security. We are at the breaking point. We're beyond the breaking point. We can turn that breaking point into a tipping point and take back our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future we deserve. It's in our hands. Thank you for being here to make it so.
Good evening. What a great crowd. Thank you, Jill, for coming down. I'm a proud member of the Green Party. I'm an independent from Orlando. Also a proud member of Communications Workers of America, Local 3108. And I would like to ask or comment and ask for a response. I want to go back to the 100 loaves of bread and explain to you how democracy works in this country. Wait a minute, how democracy should work would be, I think, if the people in this room had a choice, probably we could have an agenda set to solve most of these problems within the hour. I'll be pessimistic. It might take us two. We might have some disagreements. But the way our democracy works is that guy that has the one loaf of bread gets to make all the decisions. We all work. He pays us a pittance for the wonderful labor that you can see all around you in St. Petersburg here. All these corporate temples that our labor produced. And the way democracy should work is that guy with the 50 loaves of bread should only get one vote. But here, we don't have democracy. We have what we euphemistically call free enterprise, and which I refuse to call that. I call it capitalism, because that's what it is, and that's how our decisions are made. So, and I would like just to get a comment from Jill on that.
Thank you. Well said. Yeah, I mean, we do have crony disaster capitalism going on, and we really need a fundamental change. You know, we have to debate all the time about what is drastically reformed capitalism. As Greens, we talk about economic democracy. We need an economic democracy, and what we've got right now is nothing close to that. So that means not only giving people a right to work, for limiting the and taxing the this massive transfer of wealth from working people to the 1%. We need to start taxing the 1% and limiting the excesses of corporate wealth. We need to, restructure our tax system so that we're taxing those who got it, and change the way that the banks work and break them up and create public banks that are actually a public utility. So we're talking about really fundamental changes to create an economic democracy instead of having this crony disaster capitalism, which is the way that the system works right now. Thank you. Oh, you got Mike next. Okay, go ahead.
If it's on, yeah, it's on.
Great.
Dr. Stein, hello. My name is Mark Scopen. I was accompanied the Wright, the Corporate Economics Human Rights Campaign, up to Charlotte, North Carolina, doing the Democratic National Convention. I was at the press conference with you and Sherry Hunkle and everyone else that was conducted in Marshall Park that was disrupted by some members of the Occupy movement. And it was, as people who were there probably remember, it was very disruptive and very disrespectful and actually destroyed the press conference. I was wondering what your perspective is on that now and what you would say to those few members of the Occupy movement that wrecked the press conference that day. I'm really interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, so there was a woman who kept showing up all over the country at these Occupy events. Somehow she had the money to travel, and according to one of the Occupy organizers, they heard her mutter something about, "If you do that, I'm going to arrest you."
What's that?
Suggesting that she was blowing her cover, that she was actually a spy for the police, and part of the harassment effort against Occupy and both the social organizing and the political organizing that was going on there. Because she was the only person I ever encountered who actually tried to disrupt the spontaneous organizing that's going on at Occupy. So that's my perspective, and we now know that there was a lot of police disruption, there was FBI spying, and there was Homeland Security that was on the attack. And I think that was just one example of it. For the most part, we've seen Occupy move from a position of being apolitical to actually now being political. And out of, in the Northeast, for example, we are doing candidate trainings through the Occupy movement, because they have people who are wanting to get into the fight, having been in the target area and beat up by police and thrown into jail and having their First Amendment rights stripped from them, and having been evicted. I'm now seeing occupiers really get that they need to use all the tools available to them, and that politics is just one of those tools. They continue to be very suspicious, as they should, of traditional politics. So it's really great. They're interested in Greens. They're interested in socialist parties. They're really interested in the politics of the progressive agenda. So it's great. I think we're all working together more and more. Thank you.
Jill, could you tell us a little bit about your trip to Norway?
Sure. Okay. So I was in Norway about 6 weeks ago. I was invited to come because Norway is in the process right now of breaking through. Their Green Party has been elected to municipal levels of government, so they're on their city councils in all the big cities. And they're making a push now to get into parliament. And this is sort of what we're seeing a lot all over the world, that Green parties are sort of working their way up from the grassroots. It generally comes up through city councils and then up to legislatures and parliaments. So they were hoping that by bringing in, an American Green presidential candidate, that they would get some press attention. But Justin Bieber, I think, beat us to it. He was there that weekend. So they didn't get a lot of press. But They had German Greens there and Swedish Greens too, and it was really exciting to meet with them and talk with them. Their big campaign right now is to get their national energy company to make it green and to get it off of oil. Their big company, Statoil, which I should mention right now, is one of the major investors in Canadian tar sands and in Arctic exploitation. So they're trying to get the word out all over the world because Norway and Statoil are very sensitive to how the world is talking about them. So at every chance you can, criticize Statoil, Norway's national oil company, for being an oil company, and make the point that it should be a clean energy company. We need to democratize our energy, not just nationalize it, but it needs to be democratically run in a way that serves all of us. And Norway would be a great example if we can help make that happen there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Feeney from St. Pete. Several people here know me, I think. My question to you is, you spoke about President Obama's recent speech regarding his plans for national security, foreign policy, that kind of thing. We know that both parties have a policy that's basically based on issues like sovereignty and economic interests. But I would ask, since I'm not a Green, okay, so I'm interested in knowing what your position is. What rubric would you use to govern your foreign policy?
International law and human rights. Period. Either we will be a nation of laws or the wild, wild west all over the world, and that's the direction we're going. And I would add to that, restraining excesses of power in the imperial presidency. You know, this is against everything that our Constitution was supposed to be about. We're supposed to be about limits of power. And the way that war power has been usurped by the president, it was supposed to be the power of the people through Congress, not the power of an all-powerful Congress. So we need to take that power back. And I would add that unrestrained power is not only a threat of big government, it is a threat of big corporations. And I think that is what, the Green Party, I think, really brings uniquely to this. With the Libertarians, we share this understanding that unrestrained power is tyranny. But I think the Greens have really understood that unrestrained power in the hands of corporations is equally tyranny and must be stopped. And right now, we are in a state of the world where corporations are actually more powerful than governments through these World Trade Agreements. So the real source of tyranny right now is through multinational corporations.
I know you made mention of the growing emergence of a police state, the whole militarization of the police in general. I mean, what is your feelings? Do you think it's wise for us, like the whole, the Second Amendment, like, people seeing what defense we have, just what I see is going for the government to the civilian state.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Second Amendment question. I can tell you how I feel instinctively. I have a real commitment to nonviolence. So I personally don't really relate very much to armed resistance, and I think at the end of the day, armed resistance is not going to do it, because they have more arms than we do, more arms than we can ever hope to have. So, I think the power here is through a social movement. That said, looking around the world, there are lots of countries that have guns that are not violent places. So I do understand where they're coming from. And I feel like it's an issue that we should not allow to divide us. And I worry about that a lot, because I feel like there are many Greens who feel very, very attached to Second Amendment rights. My husband feels that way. And there are legitimate arguments about how there are certain rights to bear arms that are written into the Constitution. So it becomes pretty murky and it gets down in the weeds really quickly. To me, there are two really important things. One is that we need a real commitment to nonviolence, regardless of whether people own guns or not. And that we really need to deal with conflict and mental health needs. I think, we've got a nation full of depressed and stressed out people who are on trigger alert. They're on a hair trigger alert. And whether they've got a knife or a gun, or a handgun or an automatic weapon, we got a lot of people who are going crazy, literally and figuratively, because that is just a symptom, in my view, of how our communities are under attack and are falling apart. So, I think the name of the game here is building community. It's getting healthy. I think mental, depression and the whole world of mental health is not different from our social health and our economic health and the food that we eat and the poisons that we're being poisoned by. There's no way that you can create a healthy society. And one of the first symptoms of an unhealthy society is that it becomes violent and kids start fighting with each other. Kids who are lead poisoned, they lose social cues and social controls, and we see this all the time. And the guns, that makes it worse, but we're poisoning people into craziness and violence. So there are many ways that we can heal this, and they're all built into the Green New Deal. So that's, I think a really important place to start. And maybe, how many more questions we got? Because I don't want to keep you here forever. You've been very patient. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 5, and then we'll call it at that.
6.
All right, 6. Try to make your question short, and I'll try to make my answer short. Yeah. On there too. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, start.
Hey, I just want to, Rachel, I don't want to see how you feel about this. Another thing connected with agribusiness.
Yeah.
Besides all the terrible things that you talked about, I think there's another level, even deeper level of humanity, from almost an anthropological level, and not even almost. The whole idea of passing on a culture from one generation to the next, how you grow your food, how you learn. It seems like, along with destroying our very vocabulary that we use, we're seeing a sudden break in the way that information and culture is transferred from one generation to the next. I mean, this is literally killing human society. You feel that way?
Absolutely. Very well said. I couldn't say it any better. Next question. Really true. And what's happening, to the food system is, again, just symptomatic of what's happening, the breakdown in our communities altogether. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. Sure. I actually, I try to make this quick, but in the last election, it seemed what separated the Republicans from the Democrats, very much centered on social issues. Women's reproductive and health rights, gay rights, etc. While I don't wish to be party against women or gay, I've noticed that it seems that maybe the issues are shied away from some, perhaps thinking them divisive. I just wanted to throw a comment.
Sure. So on LGBT rights, when I ran for governor in 2002, I was the first candidate in Massachusetts to advocate for equal marriage at a time when the Democrats were debating whether they would stand up on civil unions. So I guess for us, it's such old hat, that maybe it doesn't stand out in our agenda. But it also depends, who's in the room. And, we are very, during the presidential campaign, for those who were tuned in, we were pushing LGBT rights. When the president refused to sign an executive order for LGBT rights in the workplace, we were calling him out on that. When he refused to stand up for marriage rights for immigrants, you know, to be able to bring LGBT spouses, you know, in many ways. He was all about lip service. He was very much about lip service. He was still enforcing the DOMA, you know, through much of his campaign. And then when he said he wasn't going to enforce the DOMA, he wasn't, you know, he said, well, I'll leave it up to the states, but he wasn't going to do anything at the state level to push equal enforcement of, you know, of equal marriage rights. That, you know, violates the 14th Amendment to discriminate on marriage rights. So the Democrats can definitely be taken to task. They'll only go so far, and it's mostly lip service. And, you know, on women's reproductive rights, same there. I mean, look at poor women. Poor women don't have access to reproductive health care. So that's always been, you know, because women on Medicaid don't have access to abortions. I mean, it's outrageous. The people who most need, you know, control of their economic destinies, you know, and can't afford, you know, family planning and birth control don't have access to abortion rights. So, yeah, it's terrible. And we stand up, but, you know, I think it just depends on what topic has to be on the table. It's definitely there in our agendas and so on if you look for it. Thanks for asking.
Thank you so much.
Great.
I'm sorry to interrupt the questions, but with so many people starting to leave, we wanted to make a couple of announcements, so we'll just be a minute. Number one, the Green Party is having the state convention this week. We invite everyone to come for the last part of it tomorrow. It's been going on since Friday night when it was opened with Jill at the Sacred Grounds Coffee House. Secondly, we want everyone to be aware of the Bradley Manning protest. It was mentioned earlier by Jill. It is next Saturday at MacDill Air Force Base. It's happening all over the country. However, MacDill, which is Central Command, is so important to be there, and we invite everyone to join. The Greens have endorsed this, Veterans for Peace, a whole range of organizations have endorsed this, and it is the only protest, Bradley Manning protest in the Southeast, which is disturbing, but an unfortunate reality. And so I invite everyone to come to that. Also, we want to let people know that you can get involved in the Green Party. We have a local St. Pete Greens here if you're from St. Petersburg, and our next meeting is June 10th. That's a Monday night at 7:30. You can see me about that afterwards if you want to get involved in the local Greens. Lastly, we want to let people know about Move to Amend, and the Green Party is very involved in supporting Move to Amend. Please come over and talk to Maria Boozer Green, and also on the national committee of the Move to Amend, and please talk to her about Move to Amend. We'll get back to questions now. Thank you. Oh, lastly, I'm sorry, one thing very important. We mentioned about, you know, voting. Please, if you are interested in the Green Party, register as a Green Party. You can say you're green or you vote green. What we need you to do is vote Green Party and sign up and register as a Green. Thank you.
Yes. And run for office. Yes. Great. Appreciate
Sign
that.
in here for Green Party information.
Yeah, be sure to sign in just so we can stay in touch.
Yeah, yes, I have a question. Is this on?
Yeah. You gotta hold it up fairly close. It doesn't.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Okay. My question is about agriculture, but it's more along the lines of urban agriculture, actually being able to design cities to produce the food that's needed for that city within the city walls, or at least the majority of it, especially as population densities get so much higher and we're increasing the number of population. And this is worldwide, not just in the U.S. Actually, U.S. is one of the countries that's fairly stable, but other countries like India, where the population is going to be in less than 100 years, to be set over 700 people per square kilometer, and that's countrywide.
Great. Yeah, good point. You know, there's a lot of urban agriculture going on. There are lots of, abandoned lots and properties. I mean, in this country, there are just so many opportunities for urban agriculture. And if we were doing it in a systematic way, not only planting, but ensuring that there's a market and creating free space for farmers markets in the cities. This is what Brazil did. They provided public land for farmers to sell their food, and at high traffic areas where there was just a lot of foot traffic, and it was great because it ensured that the farmers then were going to be able to sell their food. So there are all kinds of ways that our local governments, municipal governments, could support farming. To buy local produce for our schools would be wonderful.
There's in South Korea, they use the medians in between the interstates as farmers.
Wow.
They were growing rice every there. When they sold, this is a huge city. I mean, all the buildings in St. Pete pushed into one, twice as high, would be one apartment complex.
Unbelievable.
In Seoul.
Wow.
They have every little piece of land is being used for farmers.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah.
Real quick, I'm wondering what the EPA's opinion or stance is on all the things you mentioned tonight about the environmental problems we have globally and locally and nationwide. Do they agree with the Green Party, or are they in conflict with what you're saying here? And if, whatever that is, what is their solution? Are they doing anything about this stuff?
For the most part, I would say no. And, because they generally don't consider food their issue. They are not acting on climate change, and they're not acting to regulate carbon dioxide emissions. I think they were going to look at existing carbon CO2 plants. I haven't followed it closely to say exactly where they are, but they just took a baby step, which was all that they took.
Why?
Why? Because they are a very political institution, and they tend to support what the president wants to do, who appoints them. But beyond that, I think it's us. And there was a time, the EPA was created under Richard Nixon. One of the worst Republican presidents ever. Under Richard Nixon, we got the EPA, we got the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, we got the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade, and got abortion rights approved, and we brought the troops home from Vietnam. That was all under Richard Nixon. That tells you it's not the president, it's what we, the people, make happen. So, I think for everybody who went out today for the GMO thing, I was only there for part of it, but it was so much fun. It was really awesome. And same is true for the climate demonstrations. When Germany's wall came down, I just learned from Friedman, who was there, they were holding weekly demonstrations. Every week, every Monday evening, everybody was getting out and protesting. I think we need a culture of protest, where we are out there in force with flags that say vote Green Party, so they know that this is not just a social protest, this is a political protest, and the writing is on the wall that their days are numbered. Thank you. Next. Yeah.
Hi. I agree with everything you say. Thank you. But I think it's not fair to blame present administration for all that's going on in our environment. I think it started with Industrial Revolution, and nobody mentions population explosion anymore. I think this is what really causes everything else from.
Good point. And we can, of course, deal with the population explosion. How do we deal with it? Well, there are several countries that deal with population simply by giving women the ability to control their reproductive destiny. That's how you deal with the population issue. Because given the choice, women do not want the stress of 5, 6, or 700 children. Women who actually have a choice. They used to say you've got to educate women and give them a job. And then they found out, no, you don't need to do that. All you have to do is just give us a choice. We get educated by having children. That is an education in itself. You don't want to have more children the bounds of children we can take care of. You know, this is what we're bringing children into, so we need to fix it up and stop overstressing it. So the U.S. needs to get out of the business of suppressing family planning and reproductive rights. That will go a long way. And this is not to blame it just on Democrats. Republicans have been a driver. They've both been taking turns here in this process. You know, so the whole, you know, a pops on both of their houses. We need to get politics back in our hands, get the corporations out of it. All right, real quick. There were another couple. Yeah, great.
Just real quick, my name is Jay Alexander. I'm a local official here. Anyway, I just wanted to ask you about a program that was in FDR, Civilian Conservation Corps. Is that part of the Green New Deal?
Absolutely.
And also, there is a bill in Congress by Marcy Kaptur. I was wondering if the Green Party could endorse that bill.
I don't know what's in that. I mean, I know some great things about Marcy Kaptur, but I'm not exactly familiar with that bill. But we do. I mean, we do endorse good bills when they, you know, when they're worthy of endorsement. So let me know. What's that? I've already endorsed it? Great. Well, then you probably would too. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a question. How prevalent are greens at municipal level in terms of government, like city governments, and across the country? How prevalent are greens in office right now?
There are, put it this way, I think about 20% of all the Greens who ran for municipal office got elected. So there are a fair number who are getting elected. And we need more people to run. As the gentleman over here was saying before, we need more people to run for local office. And there are over 120. It's about 120 that we have that kept track of, but it's quite a bit more than that. Not everybody reports in. So there are some out there, and we're trying to do a better job now of actually networking across states and across communities so that we can help more people run. We're having a national meeting in Iowa. I believe it's in Des Moines in the end of July. If you're interested, you can find out more at gp.org, greenparty.org. And it's a great place. We're going to be doing a bunch of workshops on running for office and starting locals and a bunch of projects and just skill building to help people do the things we need to do. So consider coming. It's really fun. And that gets through the list. I think it did. So great. Good job. Thank you all so much.
On behalf of the St. Petersburg Green Party, the Florida Green Party, and of course the Green Party USA, we want to thank everyone for coming. We want to especially thank Jill Stein for sharing with us the St. Petersburg Museum of History, allowing us to have this event here. And of course, I want to give a special thanks to our poet, and this is related as well. Let me remind you, Emma Goldman said that a revolution worth happening must have dance, and to me that means arts and culture and music. Revolution must have that. So I want to applaud our poet here, who is very prolific. I've met him several times, and he also has a great deal of experience in relation to his own experiences in Iraq as a veteran. He didn't ask for this, but if people want to go to the Move to Men table and make a donation to help this brother out and support arts and music and culture, please do that. Also, there is an after party tonight at Hideaway on 1756 Central Avenue. Grand Peoples will be performing, and a number of us Greens are going there, so please join us. Thank you to everyone again, and good night. 1756 Central Avenue. Register green, vote green, party. Thank you.
Right here.
Yeah, if you want to get on the mailing list, there's a sign-in sheet. Please go over and see Anita at the table here. Keep informed. Keep involved.